Good evening, everybody. My name is Loughman, and I'm looking at the SQ3R strategy. I worked with Jeannie Stokes on this one. The SQ3R strategy is a literacy strategy that really involves just what good reading is. It involves processing before, during, and after the reading. It is designed it was Robinson in 1946 came up with this strategy based on the information processing systems of cognitive theory, which said that just the more times we look at a text and if we go through different acts with that text, that we're more likely to move the information from our short-term to our long-term memory. It is a very structured approach, but it allows for students to apply that structure to a variety of content areas. It allows them to use this structure with any different types of text and different content areas, and it really sets them up for good study skills and good habits. SQ3R stands for Survey, Question, Read, Recite, and Review, and it has been proven to be effective and versatile. It can be integrated into content areas and across grade levels. I currently use it with my 9th and 10th graders. Jeannie said she uses it with her college freshmen. So we have there's a variety of levels. Students develop effective study habits through it, and it really helps to enhance their comprehension retention because it is based on this cognitive theory. It really starts with using their schemas and integrating into their schemas. And then the more times that we look at a text and try to process the information in different ways, try to use that information processing theory and memory theory, that just by reprocessing information, we can better move things from our short-term to our long-term and thus increase our retention. It's metacognitive in nature in the fact that at each step, the students are asked to look at look at what they did and what they understand and identify areas that they don't understand. I'm going to start off today using this is a website page from adlit.org. This page really talks about SQ3R, but we're just going to use it as a text. We're going to use it as a text so that I can walk you through the SQ3R process. So step 1 is to survey the text. I want you to go through and identify what's the title of this piece. Then you're going to list the subheadings. What I'd like you to do is list the subheadings in the dialog box, please. Let's take a moment to do that. Good job, everybody. I'm sure we got them right. And then we're going to describe any graphs, charts, or pictures. I always tell my students to look at these things because when I'm a writer and I am trying to write something that's really hard to describe, and sometimes I find it's easier to use a graph or a chart or a picture. This is also what other writers do. So those are things we can't just eliminate or avoid. And then also, are there any vocabulary words that stick out to you? Survey and see if there's any vocabulary words that right off the bat stand out to you. Or also, a lot of times in chapters, they'll give us vocabulary work at the end of the passage. Does this passage have that? And then go ahead and describe, again in the dialog box, we're going to do this, in 1 or 2 sentences what this passage will be about. And for the sake of this, we're going to ask you to do it in 1 sentence. Go ahead and describe what this passage will be about. Remember, you're not reading it, you're just surveying it. Because this could be a much longer passage. We're just using this for the sake of time right now. So in 1 sentence. Good. All right. So then the next step is to question the text. And this is where we're going to turn the title of the passage into a question. How can we turn that title into a question? This title itself is a lot harder, or is more difficult than some of the other titles. I'm doing an article with my ninth graders right now called The Truth About Fast Food. So it's really easy. They can turn it into, what is the truth about fast food? This one makes it a little more difficult. And so I'm going to help guide you to this one. I came up with, for this one, what is SQ3R? And then what we're going to do is create questions out of the boldface headings. So the first one I want to model for you. I found the boldface heading was background. So I'm going to come up here and I put the question, what is the background on SQ3R? Our other two boldface headings are benefits and create and use the strategy. Can I get two people to write in the, or anybody, in the dialogue box to please come up with one of the question for benefits and the question for create and use the strategy. Great. We want something that is something like, what are the benefits of SQ3R? And the other one is, how can I create and use this strategy? Anything like that would work. Also, I want you to look and see if there are any additional questions you have about this passage. When I do this with my students, they are very used to avid levels of questioning. Our level 1 question is really probably are things we can identify in the text, the answers we can find in the text. That's probably the questions we came up with for our headings. The second, level 2, is more of a synthesis, and so that's more of our title question. What is SQ3R? They're going to have to synthesize all the information from the sections. Level 3 is really a discussion question. It can be something like how effective, or why would this work, or when would I use this? And so it's got to be something that moves them beyond the text. They can take these questions and put them on their piece of paper, set themselves up for notes. This is a great way because they have these notes set up and it really gives them a purpose for reading. The next thing you're going to do is read. You're going to read each of the sections one at a time. Keep in mind your questions as you read. So as you read that, keep the questions in mind. Now, sometimes teachers have their students just read without answering questions, or they have them read and answer the questions. I don't like to have my students answer the questions yet. I like to have them highlight the answers in their text, because I know that by doing that, I can get them to look at the text twice. I can get them to look at the text once for highlighting and then once for answering the questions. I also ask them to circle areas that they're unclear of and write questions in the margin to help them clear up confusion. And this is really helpful for me because as I'm walking around and I see areas of the text circled, I can it's really visual, I can eyeball it, and I know what I can, as the teacher, talk about and clarify. And with those, they can come up with additional questions. The next thing is to recite, or retell, or recall. These are all kind of the same, they're titled differently in different texts. You're going to go through the text and answer the questions you identified in step 1. Remember, the information must be paraphrased. So once I have my students go through and highlight the answers, then I make them process them in their own words and answer those questions on their lined piece of paper. The more times they go over this information, the more it helps with retention. So I just find the more times we can get eyes on text, the better. And this can also be done orally. You can ask the questions and have them answer it. The final step is the review. Oftentimes the review can be done orally, but this is just another way to go through the information again. It can be orally as a whole class discussion. You can have them summarize to each other in partners. We do this thing called the preview, and I give each student 1 minute to create a preview for someone who's going to read it next time. Just like you do for a movie, you create a preview for it. I ask them to do that with the text when they're talking orally. Summarizing, Taylor in 1986 said summarizing is a great way to review because it requires the reader to realize the subordinate or important ideas in the text. Anybody who's worked with Marzano strategies knows this importance of summarizing, in that it requires students to look at what's important and decide what's not important. And when I have my students summarize, again, I want eyes on the text again. I want them reading again. So I have them reread this is the 5th time they've looked at the text. I have them look at it again, and I have them go through and put stars by key terms, 6 or 7 key terms. Then I have them make a list of those key terms and use those key terms in their summarizing, because I want their summaries to be in their own words, but I want them to understand the basic main concepts that are in the text. So just to review, the SQ3R process includes 3 that are steps that are primarily teacher-centered. We have the survey. Really, this teacher is going to lead the students in the survey of the reading selection. We're going to pay attention to headings, topics. It's just kind of a way to get to know the format. Like Doug Fisher said with the gradual release of responsibility, of course, you're going to start with leading your students, but as time goes on, we need to back off and let our students be the ones to take charge of the surveys. Again, and then that's the same with the questions. We're going to model questions for them, model how to build questions out of each heading and subheading. But as time goes on, they're going to need to be responsible for it. And then their job is to read. They're going to read each section, keeping the questions in mind as they read. In the next 2 steps, these are primarily student-centered. The students are going to recite or retell the questions, or retell the answers to these questions. They can write them down. They can do them verbally. They're going to do this for each of those questions. And then the final, they do a review, either orally or using a summary or some kind of final activity to get them to review the information again. We used the following articles. We used Jacobowitz from 1988. We used Huber 2004 and Donald 1967. I'm so sorry that I can't stop coughing. In each of these articles, one of the things we noticed is some of the articles are a little outdated, but the process is still effective. There's been newer articles that talk about modifying. They add SQ3R3 or SQ3RC. So people have modified this strategy, but the essence of the strategy is still good reading. It's looking at students' background information before they start, having them create a purpose, or having them preview the text, having them predict what it's going to be about, creating questions, which sets a purpose for reading, reviewing the reading by answering questions and looking at content, and then doing some kind of summary. These are all good strategies, and if you look at reading programs, we work primarily with what they call the ERWC program. These strategies are ingrained in that program, and so it's one of those things that even though the research might be a little old, the format is still there and the concepts are still there. Thank you so much for listening to this presentation, and I hope this helped. Please go ahead and give me a thumbs up if you think you will use this strategy in your classroom.